As a group, we decided to focus our inquiry within the Grade 10 Social Studies curriculum, specifically centering on the concept of globalization. The question we sought to explore was, what does slavery look like in an interconnected world? We do not consider ourselves as people who encourage slavery, but are we? So to begin, slavery is something that has grown with society. As cities and towns grow, so did the desire of slave ownership. Slave ownership has been dated to the 18th century BC. It was also very popular with the Greeks and the Romans. Since these early times, civilizations have considered it their right to own others. Slaves often consisted of conquered peoples, the spoils of war. Other ways of becoming a slave include incurring a debt and as punishment for crimes. One of the most important aspects of slavery was the fact that a child born to a female slave was also considered a slave. This ensured the growth of the slave population. The white man's burden was a huge factor in the slave trade. Because European thought fostered the notion that other cultures were barbaric, it was easy to justify the enslavement of groups. The transatlantic slave trade is one of the most well known. African slaves were even sent back to Europe to showcase, basically shown to other Europeans as artifacts and not as people. Not all Africans suffered in the slave trade, however. Some Africans became quite wealthy by capturing others, either in war or by kidnapping, and selling them to European buyers. The slave trade became an enterprise, one that has still left a mark on African society till this day, as seen by the Rwandan genocide. Once slaves were purchased in Africa, they braved the voyage across the Atlantic. Some slaves were shipped to the south, and others to the north. Shipped is the appropriate term here, as slaves were considered cargo by the ship crew, stored in the cargo hold, usually being forced to lay on top of one another or closely beside one another, like in boxes. Many did not survive this journey or else lost loved ones. Slaves did not receive fresh air or proper nutrition. At times, young boys and some women were allowed on the upper deck during the days, but only as forms of entertainment or as labor. Once they arrived at their port, slaves were quickly sold, usually for the rough plantation life, and usually without their loved ones. In 1861, following the election of President Lincoln, the United States was split by the Civil War. The end of this war in 1865 signaled the end of slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation. This was a big defeat for the southern states that relied heavily on slavery to run plantations. Slavery, however, did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery remains a global reality. One type of slavery that is getting a lot of attention is wage slavery. Millions of people in the developing world work for less than $1 an hour to produce inexpensive goods for global consumer markets. The garment industry is one of the biggest employers of wage slaves. The garment industry is the third largest industry in the world. Many garment manufacturers have factories in the developing world as costs are lower and profits are larger as a result. In this slide, the cost of producing a shirt in the US and Bangladesh are compared. Labor costs in the US would be $7.47 and in Bangladesh, only 22 cents. In April of this year, the Rana Plaza factory collapsed in Bangladesh. Over 1,100 people were killed and another 2,500 injured. Cracks in the building were found a day before the collapse and the building was deemed unsafe. The employees of other stores in the complex were told not to enter the building. Garment workers were ordered to go back to work or lose a month's wages as a result. This shows that the idea of one individual's life being worth less than another individual's is still prevalent in society. The wages and safety of these workers were compromised so that big corporations could gain more profit. This is reminiscent of the horrible conditions that were faced by plantation workers during the transatlantic slave trade. Wage slavery is not only a problem in the developing world. Walmart workers have been protesting low wages and limited working hours. The working poor in Canada made up 19% of people who regularly visited food banks. A full-time wage worker could bring home approximately $21,000 a year. In Canada, a family of four with a yearly income below $34,000 is said to live in poverty. In the U.S., Walmart employees are suffering. 80% of employees receive food stamps. Annually, each Walmart store costs taxpayers $420,000 in government help, including Medicaid and food stamps. The Rana Plaza factory may close for Walmart stores around the world. So, what do we do? Do we close down garment factories in the developing world? Would that help the workers or add to their suffering? Do we increase the wages of Walmart employees and make goods more expensive so less people shop at Walmart and people lose their jobs? How do we move forward? The issue of how we collectively mitigate the issues of slavery and hopefully to one day eliminate it entirely is intimately tied with what motivates slavery in the first place. Throughout history, up to modern day, people have been keeping, trapping, and trading slaves as if people were objects of consumption, not human beings. As an example of human trafficking in Canada alone, which is a subtype of slavery, is estimated to account for $5 to $7 billion annually. Thinking about peoples as dollars and cents ties the entire practice back to the values inherent within colonial capitalist worldviews and ultimately to the global issue of poverty and wealth distribution. Putting an end to slavery will require people of the developed world to begin the process of recognizing the continued existence of slavery, to recognize the part they play within the slave trade, to make changes to the way we purchase as consumers, and to lobby both our own government and international governments to take an active role in shifting policy and committing to the eradication of slavery in all forms. Recognizing how our colonial past has evolved into this phenomenon will help to inform our actions in the future. The transmission of cultural values of domination, oppression, and mercantilism into our modern day context implicates all modern consumers in the horrors of the slave trade. Therefore, we should take great effort in ensuring that our strategy for bringing people out of slavery is dignified, respectful, and sustainable. Slavery is not just the mistakes that have been repeated throughout history, it is a real and current issue. So to answer the original inquiry, to know what slavery looks like in an interconnected world, we only have to look at the products of slavery, our clothing, our shoes, and even our food.